What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Points Per Podcast. Thank you for joining us as always. My name is Eric. That's my co-host Vishy. And today we're digging into part 2 of our Dynasty Risers and Fallers video. If you guys haven't seen part 1 yet, I highly suggest you go check that out after you watch this one. But we're doing a similar thing today where we hope this serves as like a status update for you guys to let you know which players are seeing their values fluctuate the most so far this season. We're also going to try to find some lessons learned based on those value changes, and then hopefully use those lessons learned in a predictive sense for the future to try to get ahead of other future value changes across the Dynasty landscape. In that first video, we focused on the pass catchers, the wide receivers, and tight ends. In this one, we're going to be talking about quarterbacks and running backs. So I'm pretty excited to dig into this one. But Vishy, I got to ask you first, how you doing, man?
Dude, I'm doing great. In part 1, I was at the old apartment with some moving boxes. If you're following along, I've moved now, new house. Don't worry, I haven't any decor yet, so we're sitting by a window. But yeah, I mean, follow along on the moving journey with me. I'm sure in a couple of weeks we're gonna have a sweet setup somewhere in this place. But for now, dining table, kitchen window, and excited to get into these risers and fallers.
Absolutely, I'm happy for you. The setup you got already looks great. But yeah, let's dig into these risers and fallers. Like you said, I'll pull up the KTC chart, and this is with every position on here because the first player that I think we want to talk about is going to be Drake Maye, probably the biggest riser, and according to KTC, at least in the last month, definitely the biggest riser is Drake Maye. We can see him all the way up here as the 4th ranked asset in all of Dynasty. And in the same tier as Josh Allen, JSN, and Jamar Chase. We can drop this down to just quarterbacks before we get into the discussion where he is the QB2 overall. But I want to start this one with you, Vishy, because I know this is one that you were particularly excited to get into. We've seen a dramatic jump in his value, which I can pull up, as you can see by these graphs, in terms of like actual like dynasty asset value and even in positional ranking as well. But I'm curious your thoughts on this jump and why it may have happened.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say, as a Ravens fan, I'm not looking forward to the AFC Championship just being the Gillette Stadium Invitational for like another decade. We had enough of that in the early 2000s. I'm ready to move on, but it looks like that might be the case. Drake Maye looks amazing. To be honest, I don't have too many notes on the why. I'm really curious to hear your analysis on what might have changed both within the last few years with him as a QB and the Patriots as a kind of an organization as a whole, kind of taking a step forward now. But in terms of value and how his value has changed, last September, according to Keep Trade Cut, again, not the gospel, but it's a good reference point of how the community views him, which is what ultimately drives trades and any kind of moves with him and so on. His value was less than half of Josh Allen's. So, I mean, I'm assuming Josh Allen's somewhere in the high 9,000s. It's kind of KTC kind of assumes like a 9,999 max, basically 10,000 is the max value.
Yeah.
Or so. And I think as of last September, his value was like in the 4,000s or something. You know, he was drafted maybe in late first or seconds in rookie drafts. But clearly, you know, people weren't excited about that ceiling as much. The upside wasn't calling for him to be drafted and valued for multiple firsts. And now people are one for wanting him with Josh Allen. Like, if you go to trade databases, this exists. And I don't blame them. I mean, I think I don't see a reason maybe why you wouldn't proceed with that at this point in time, given what we know, unless you think his performance might revert. But yeah, I mean, to put that kind of value jump in other terms, last September, he might have gotten you like a kind of like a Jameson Williams. Also, we're recording this on Monday, November 24th. Jameson Williams did not have a good game yesterday. Shout out him. But last September, he might get you like a Jameson or like a Zay Flowers or something. And now, if you're set at the QB position, you could re-roll him reasonably for like a Bijan or a Jahmyr Gibbs. And that actually like might be a good move depending on your team needs. That's how crazy this like meteoric rise has been, as you can see by that chart there. And I want to get through your analysis because I think there's some lessons that we likely could take away, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on what they could be.
Yeah, I think the lesson for me is probably more about how you view rookies at the rookie draft, right? So I'm going to talk about it in the sense of Drake Maye himself and also in comparison to some of the other quarterbacks in his class. But more than anything, I think as we go through this video, especially when we jump into running backs, we're going to talk about how situation does matter for dynasty assets, but it matters more or less based on position. And I think it matters maybe the least of any position or close to it with quarterback. This is about how good these guys are. This is about their ability to translate to the NFL, and to be cerebral, to be able to understand and be able to take on the load that is being an NFL quarterback, which is the most difficult job in sports. And so I think Drake Maye's prospect profile was one that was really, really encouraging, was one that I think was easy to bet on. He was clearly able to operate from within structure. He was also, athletic and gifted physically with his arm and his ability to run. But that stuff comes secondary. You have to be accurate and you have to be able to operate within structure. Those were two things that I was fairly confident that Drake Maye was able to do. The accuracy was a little inconsistent at times, but that's the case with all college quarterbacks. The reason I bring up the situation thing is when comparing him to the likes of JJ McCarthy in his own 2024 Dynasty rookie draft class. Once we got, past the draft and we saw that JJ McCarthy landed in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell, with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, we said, wow, like that situation is fantastic. We're going to bump him up, which warranted. Situation matters. He should get a little bit of a bump for that. But some of the dynasty community was willing to bump him up above Drake Maye in that kind of middle of superflex first rounds. And I thought that was going way too far, right? Like I didn't think Drake Maye was a perfect prospect, but I certainly didn't think that JJ McCarthy was a perfect prospect. He was far from it. He was never asked to kind of be the driver of his offense. His pass volume was always super low. I was unimpressed with his accuracy from a consistency perspective. His mechanics were kind of weird. And that's not to say that I was so confident throughout, all of the last 2 years that he was going to be a bust. That's not even the case. But I was never saying JJ McCarthy over Drake Maye. And I think that is an important lesson to learn. Like, be more convinced in what you think of these prospects as individuals when it comes to the quarterback position versus what their situation looks like.
Sure. I think that's an excellent argument. And yeah, anyone can argue now hindsight's 2020 if you're, for example, comparing Drake Maye and JJ McCarthy. But I think the overarching lesson that can be taken away here, really without any pushback, is that, yeah, with the QB position, you truly can trust talent. It'll eventually emerge. I'm not quite sure that's what's happening in Cleveland right now with Shadur, but we don't have to get into all that. We can leave all that aside. I think that's a great argument to make. And we did touch on this in the previous video for anyone that does want to go back with receivers as well. We had quite a long discussion about talent and look, ultimately, will that reasonably or with a higher hit rate result in a breakout? And honestly, that's kind of what we're seeing with the likes of JSN or Emeka, people that weren't necessarily drafted into the best situation year one with their teams, but there's no denying their production now. I think that's a great point you brought up. Do you have any other risers or falls at the QB position you want to transition to next? If you're wrapped up.
Let's go back to the quarterback position here. I want to talk about Jaxson Dart up here as the, QB 9.
Looks like it.
Even with his injury or with the concussion, obviously it's not long-term, so that hasn't really impacted his positional value, maybe just plateaued a little bit. But I think that this is an interesting case as well, where you have a guy who is drafted late in the first round. He's not necessarily the highest pedigree prospect. He's not someone who was highly thought of coming into draft season. There were lots of question marks about whether he was even going to be a first round pick at all. And then, he goes to the Giants, which we thought of as not a very good situation, right? But he is absolutely broken out, and he went from kind of like you said, had this meteoric rise similar to Drake Maye, just, not quite to that elite height yet, where he wasn't a first round dynasty rookie pick in some leagues. A lot of times he was falling into the second, and now he might even be the most valuable rookie. Could be in contention for the 101 with the likes of Ashton Genty. And so I think there's things to be taken away from this, but I'll let you lead us off. What are your thoughts on Jaxson Dart?
Yeah, I think you touched on his value well. I'm not sure he was going in the first in many rookie drafts. He's going like maybe early second in many of them, and now he's a top 25 overall asset in Dynasty. And Obviously, we're not comparing him to Drake Maye. The rise has not been equivalent. And that's also because their profile coming out of college wasn't equivalent. I think Drake Maye's profile was somewhat unanimously seen as significant or superior to Jaxson Dart's. That being said, if you did take him, now you can trade him for a couple firsts, or you can package him with a first. A lot of trades in the trade databases are showing him plus a first to kind of upgrade a QB or maybe get one of those elite receivers, which is a very reasonable trade. And I think his value gain added is due to his utility as a quarterback. That is a dual threat quarterback. Obviously, we know that Russian quarterbacks over the last decade or so have gotten a ton of value, and they're rising in prospect and real rankings. And this is for a reason. They churn out points on the ground. Shout out to Jim San, I think. He's an analyst over at FanDuel. He's someone that had Jayden Daniels as a top prospect in his class coming out. And now this year, he actually had Jaxson Dart at number 1 in his QB rankings for this class, exclusively because of the points I just mentioned. And I think it's a huge positive. And I think that's resulting in that. Again, I'm not convinced that he has the ceiling of Drake Maye, who really does look incredible at the quarterback position, or like the top 3 or 4 we typically talk about. But he's certainly going to produce, and he's most certainly going to return the value that you put into him as a pick.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, something that we can kind of take away from this is that we as a Dynasty community probably tend to undervalue these perceived to be non-elite quarterback prospects. Obviously, their range of outcomes is going to be wide, and that does include a pretty significant bust risk. Looking at the draft history and going through these guys that were quarterbacks drafted outside the top 10 or even into the early second round, there's plenty of guys that didn't pan out, right? So you could be using this rookie draft capital and not really getting anything from it. But once you get outside of that kind of first half of the first round in many rookie drafts, the hit rate drops off dramatically anyway. And I'm a big proponent of chasing ceiling, chasing upside. And I think that with these quarterbacks specifically, it's where you can find that biggest upside. You can find that biggest spike potential in dynasty value. Just going back and looking through, obviously I'm cherry picking here, but to give you guys some examples of these later drafted quarterbacks, going back to 2018, we had Lamar Jackson at the end of the first round. Obviously he's skyrocketed up in value. If you look at 2020, we had the likes of Jalen Hurts in the second round, Jordan Love at the end of the first. I think those are good examples of guys that have also taken a big jump in dynasty value. And then as recently as 2024, obviously they didn't get drafted quite as late, but just outside the top 10, you had JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix. And I just talked about JJ McCarthy and how I wasn't a big fan of his, but just in terms of the potential for their dynasty value to rise at a significant margin, especially for the likes of Bo Nix. He was another guy in a similar boat that was getting drafted at the end of dynasty rookie first rounds or even outside of the first round. And him as well. He's a guy that I don't necessarily believe in, just as a quarterback, but his dynasty value spiked. And then even if you're in that same camp where you don't believe that much in them, you can then use that spike value and trade them in the future. So that's kind of the lesson that I've taken away from this, is that we should probably at least be more aware of that ceiling potential with these type of non-elite QB prospects.
Right. And if you had to make a decision of betting 101 rookie draft capital on this kind of rushing upside, like with a Anthony Richardson, or here with like a 202 with Jaxson Dart for maybe not the exact same ceiling, but certainly at a much lower cost. That's a pretty easy question to answer. But I think it's important that, the hit rates when you get in the second round can be low, and the hit rates with a quarterback with some talent and a path to starting, it's going to be higher, I think, especially in the second round. Yeah,
absolutely. That will probably do it for quarterback risers, unless there's anybody else you want to talk about.
Not quite. I think they have been the big two we've seen this year. And they're exciting. I'm excited to see where their careers go after this.
Yeah, absolutely. But we can go to the other end of the spectrum, and we can talk about some quarterback fallers. The first one on my list is going to be Jayden Daniels. This is an interesting case, right, where he came out, immediately lit up the league, was rookie of the year, and vaulted himself all the way up into the QB1 conversation. You can see here like Vishy was talking about with Josh Allen, he was the number one dynasty asset. He was at that peak value, and QB1 kind of bouncing between that and QB2 for quite some time and throughout this offseason. He's had a little bit more disappointing of a year and also riddled with injuries, whether it be the hamstring or with the elbow most recently. But I'm curious your thoughts on this one. If you guys didn't see the first video, we talked about Malik Neighbors, who, was fantastic, is fantastic, had a significant injury, and that dropped his value. And we find that to be a great position to buy into on rebuilding dynasty teams. Do you feel the same way about Jayden Daniels, or is there any level of trepidation here?
Trepidation, man, that's throwing big words at me on the spot. No, I think there should be some, but at cost. So something I've been thinking about, a few analysts have started to touch on this too. We've seen this kind of ebb and flow pattern of QBs and why we rate them the way we do, like in the last decade or 15 years or so. So obviously, way back in the past, really before the advent of popular rushing quarterbacks, taking quarterbacks early or rating them highly, making them worth 9,999 or 7,000 or 8,000 points wasn't really worth it. The gap in points scored between the QB1 and even QB15 wasn't crazy. But then came along a couple rare rushing quarterbacks, ones with potential just to have a high floor due to their rush ability and then just have ridiculous ceilings week over week. And that's when, these Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson types came along where it was definitely worth it to take them. I think what we're seeing now is that the rushing QBs, or at least quarterbacks that can get you a couple points per week on the ground, aren't as rare anymore. I'm not saying that they're not great picks. I think all of these guys are going to score a ridiculous amount of points for you game over game. But I mean, even now we even have like Brock Purdy types just scoring like 3-4 points a game on the ground. And so when that's the case, a QB due to rushing ability alone is not necessarily a commodity anymore. And so then we do have to start thinking about, well, do they miss time due to injury, or how productive have they been through the air? Unfortunately, Jayden Daniels hasn't been the most productive through the air this season. I think there's a lot of factors that play into that. I'm curious to hear your opinion on what you think of him moving forwards. And he has missed some time due to injury. And so I think that we have to put a caveat on his value dropping so starkly. But I don't think that he's necessarily just QB1 overall discussion solely because of rushing ability. I think the times of that and maybe a little past might be kind of in that ebbing phase with the passion for rushing QBs or rushing QBs. And we do have to start valuing kind of their ability through the air a little bit more. But what do you think? I might have detoured a little bit there, but what do you think about Jayden Daniels?
No, I like all of what you said, and I'm glad to have JJ Zacharyson on the podcast with me today.
Did he say anything like that?
Yeah, that's kind of his whole mantra. But no, sorry, I'm making a joke that might not apply to many people. But no, for Jayden Daniels specifically, I think in his rookie year, and that is a relatively small sample size, he did prove himself as a passer. In his last year at LSU, I thought he proved himself as a capable passer. There's question marks about the rest of his of his prospect profile before he got to that season. But results are results. He put up a season that rivaled that of Joe Burrow at LSU and just came off of, even without the rushing, a really, truly impressive rookie season. So I think there's lots of reasons to continue to be optimistic and to want to buy low on this if you are on a rebuilding team. I have some personal biases that I want to hear your opinion on as well. Growing up a Commanders fan and knowing the pain that we experience and what this organization has done to many, many, many quarterbacks in the past, I am kind of fearful as to what that might mean if he is going to be next in a long line of ruined potential quarterback talents. I don't have any, good analytical reasons for that necessarily, other than just, like I said, my own personal bias. But it does make me worried. Cliff Kingsbury as a offensive coordinator doesn't have a great history. He showed a similar thing with Kyler Murray his rookie year, where he kind of burst onto the scene and then plateaued. I think that Jayden Daniels is definitely better than Kyler, but I think there's a conversation to be had about that similar type of talent plateau. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think, well, I'm going to have fun tempering your sorrow here a little bit. And I think we do need more time before we start putting names like Kyler Murray and his into the same sentence.
I know. I know.
No, I want to read a tweet from another Commanders fan that I thought summed it up well.
Okay.
I think the account's name was like Jayden Daniels fan 101 or something. But the tweet goes, "I'm crying. Caleb Williams and Drake Maye got 100 excuses last year." And side note, we know what Drake Maye is doing, and I think Caleb's also really turning it around this season. He looks great. Got 100 excuses last year, but Jayden Daniels' defense is literally terrorists, and he's throwing to Sunday to Wednesday Amazon overnight fulfillment workers. Half of his team is injured or on IR, and now he's the bad one.
I mean, preach.
In a perspective honestly, but we can give it some more time. But before I think there's to temper any Commanders fans that are overly upset about the future of their team with Jayden Daniels at the helm. I do think it's going to be a while, and I don't know if he'll reach quite the value he was at. And this is not a slight at him. Again, I think it's just because there are so many QBs now that can produce on the ground and through the air that maybe none of them are truly worth just that mass separation, 2,000 points in KTC difference between the others. Because I think on any given week, they all can perform at a similarly high level. But I think we'll have to see. Obviously, I think the Commanders are nowhere near moving on. I don't think they're upset with him. I think that we just have to see what the future holds, and if he can get a slightly better O-line and supporting cast in the next few seasons.
Yeah, I hope so as well. But I really do like that point. I know we're repeating ourselves now, but I think your take, or at least the potential of this coming true, where we saw in the past the rise of the rushing quarterback and how that was a significant value gap, and how now that gap is shrinking, if not disappearing. I think that that's something that we should definitely keep our eye on as we continue on into our dynasty futures.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that shapes up. I also get your JJ Zacharyson call it now. I mean, the guy did stake a career on late round quarterback back in the day.
He's the late round quarterback guy.
He's the guy. Shout out. That wasn't necessarily the case recently. I think he has touched on it in his pods. Like, hey, we don't need to be late round. Like, Josh Allen's pretty good at the quarterback position. But who knows? We might see a resurgence of that philosophy.
Absolutely. I think starting this year, we kind of did with the likes of Drake Maye, Dak Prescott, and some of those guys going later on in season-long drafts, at least. Exactly. I know we're talking dynasty specific, but all right, let's move on to one more quarterback faller here. We don't have to talk about for quite as long unless we feel it necessary, but Joe Burrow. This is another sort of injury-related one, but for different reasons that I think we've seen a more significant dynasty value fall off from the beginning of the season. He's 29 years old. Quarterbacks, especially of his kind of mold, can produce well into their late 30s, and we're seeing that currently with the likes of Matthew Stafford, and have seen it in the past with a lot of guys. Right. But I think what I kind of thought of when I saw this significant fall was that of Patrick Mahomes, right? Where he was this untouchable, unquestioned number one asset in dynasty. Joe Burrow never reached that height, but he was in that top 2, 3, 4, depending on your league, depending on, what time you checked KTC. He was in that elite tier of quarterbacks. He's had this injury that it seems like he might come back from late this season, but was initially thought to be season ending at 29 years old with limited rushing upside. And immediately that value just tanked. And I think this is similar to kind of the AJ Brown discussion that we had, maybe not to the same extent, just because, quarterbacks have much longer longevity, but where I don't know that he ever reaches that same dynasty value height that he was once at. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think, we just kind of touched on, we're talking about redraft. This is dynasty, focus on dynasty rises and fallers. And we know they're different, but we can still learn lessons from like player perception in redraft. And this year in particular, with offseason, there are a lot of analysts that were calling Joey B kind of an avoid at cost because he was drafted as the quarterback 5, or in some cases 4, because of name recognition, and more so because he threw for like a ridiculous number of touchdowns last year. So he was due for regression. And I think, again, like redraft is different than dynasty, but that spike in perception of him also increased his dynasty value. And so pretty much no matter what, we were going to see his dynasty ranking drop if he didn't throw for 5,000 yards and like 40 touchdowns again.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing. Obviously, he is talented. He's going to be coming back into the league this week. And I think he's likely going to have a good, if not great, rest of season and continue producing. But I agree. I think he's maybe in a similar boat to Mahomes, where he's not 22 anymore, coming off an injury, about to throw for 5,000 yards for 8 years straight. And he might rise again, and maybe he reaches top 5, top 6 Dynasty QB, but it's really difficult to imagine a peak higher than that at this stage of his career, knowing his style of play as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. This gets difficult, and I'm not necessarily asking you, like, I'm not going to force you to pick any names, but do you think that this same idea applies to any other quarterbacks in the Dynasty landscape who could, with similar scenarios, see their Dynasty value fall and potentially not come back?
Oh, man, it's a great question. I'm trying to think of others that kind of might be on that upper plateau right now. I mean, so some easy ones, and this is not going to apply directly, but Josh Allen kind of is one of them, and he's not going to get higher than he is now.
He
I think
literally can't.
He literally can't.
Yeah.
I think he's an easy one. I actually don't really want to bring him into this conversation because I think he's at a peak. He's not necessarily kind of like a mid-range plateau in the lower end of his career.
Right.
I don't think like Herbert really applies. I think Baker's kind of an interesting case. His career has been much more tumultuous than Patrick Mahomes and Joey B's have been, certainly. But again, I think he's also one where we saw him playing well, at least until he got hurt as of like a week or two ago. He's playing really, really well and kind of found himself a home in Tampa Bay. But again, I can't see a scenario where he kind of breaches the top 5 or 6 or, ends up being ridiculous. Again, he's on the latter half of his career, and his game is mostly driven by, through the air efficiency with great weapons. And, I think he's also someone that unfortunately might start to see a taper off, into that plateau. Do you have any in mind?
I don't have anybody that I can like strongly, confidently point to. I think Josh Allen, we're certainly not advocating that you get rid of him, but I think that he kind of fits a similar bill. Maybe Lamar Jackson, also approaching 29 years old. And we've seen with some lower body leg injuries this season, he's been a little bit less productive as a rusher, and that's definitely affected his fantasy output and his consistency. I think Jalen Hurts is worth talking about at least a little bit. He's already seeing at least a little bit of a drop off in dynasty value just based on performance this season. He's coming off of a great week this week, obviously, in terms of fantasy performance with a 30+ point week. But I think this kind of combines some of the lessons that we've talked about throughout our quarterback discussion, where I think that most of Jalen Hurts' value as a fantasy producer does come on the ground, a lot of rushing touchdowns. And I believe less in his ability as a pure passer and his ability to operate within structure on time and accurately, consistently. And so if he experiences any change in situation, that means less rushing touchdowns or any decline physically, then I think his value could drop pretty significantly and potentially not come back up. Not that he's old by any means, but he is now 27. He's approaching his late 20s. And so if he follows a similar pattern to the likes of Mahomes and now Joe Burrow, he could see a similar kind of depressed value.
Sure. And again, these are phenomenal football players. This is just getting to the nuances of if you're trying to like value max with your team and predict whose values will grow and fall per KTC or any other kind of value estimator for Dynasty, which kind of do a good job holistically. Obviously, in a case-by-case basis, they can be debated. But in any case, if you're trying to kind of maximize value year over year and continue the growth of your team, these, while talented, are likely ones whose value will fall over the years. They're great value to contenders to keep and go win your ship. That's the goal always. But yeah, they're likely candidates, like we've discussed for different reasons, to lose value over the next few years and beyond.
Absolutely. All right, let's transition into the running back position. We could probably start with the risers. Vishy, who do you want to bring up first?
Let's go ahead and talk about. Honestly, let's just talk about Jonathan Taylor. He might not be the highest. Oh, there he is.
RB3.
Is he really RB3 in Dynasty?
He's the RB here. Yeah, let's take a look at the overall rankings here. Yeah, he's ahead of Achane, Genty, Hampton, Henderson. Yeah.
Hey man, he's not younger than them, but well, and Gibbs took over 1. I see.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have many notes in the analysis of JT. Honestly, I don't know how to explain what is going on other than kind of the offense being very productive and leveraging the ridiculous talent that we know he has. And yeah, he's obviously talented. He might be a product of the general offensive success in Indy, as is often the case. I have one worry with him. It's pretty much my only note that I wrote down is that I think his value might be fragile. He's not the youngest, and I think his value is also fragile because trading him is difficult. Like he's now worth way more than he's like probably an early first plus. Honestly, at this point, probably around a first, let's say, and anyone that has him is probably competing. Like you don't want to move off him, and if you do trade for him, like you have a shorter window to look at because again, he is a running back that's getting a lot of mileage on his legs right now, and again, he's not young like Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, you trade for Jahmyr Gibbs, you're probably leveraging that talent for a while. Yeah. And so if you do trade for him, you're looking to win in the next year or two. In these years that you give up your first before his inevitable decline as a high volume running back. So I think. Again, I didn't talk much about maybe the why into why he has risen. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and then we can talk about lessons learned from that. But I do want to note that I'm a little worried because he's extremely talented, but I worry that it's a little bit fragile as a running back that is, 27 or close to 27 now.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on JT?
I had a lot of the same notes. You hit the nail on the head with his value being fragile. That was the first thing that I put down as well. He's almost 27. I do think the value spike is at least somewhat deserved. As you mentioned, contending and winning championships is the name of the game, and he's the RB1 on the season so far. So if you're looking to win fantasy matchups, he's going to be worth a ton to your team. But in terms of like dynasty and long-term outlook, because of his age, because of maybe the fragility of the overall team situation as well, Shane Steichen has proven to be a great coach and great play caller. But we've seen Daniel Jones have plenty of ups and a lot of downs. And so who knows whether he's going to continue this level of play, whether it be just for the rest of this season or especially into next season, what his contract situation looks like. There's a lot of question marks that could cloud Jonathan Taylor's fantasy value and potentially lead it to significantly decreasing. I think it's also probably a good time to bring up what we alluded to with the quarterback discussion is just the amount that situation matters depending on the position that you're looking at. And I think running back is probably where it matters the most. Like you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor was an elite running back prospect. We've known that he's incredibly talented and is capable of these types of seasons, and we've seen him do it. He had an RB1 season a few years back. But just based on team situation, this is a position, running back specifically, that is very heavily influenced by team environment. And so that's another reason why I would be nervous to put so much stock and so much value into any running back really, but especially a running back of this age that could have that fall off coming. But again, I'm conflicted because as a contender, you should absolutely be buying into this level of production. Yeah. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I agree. I think, and if you're not a contender, I think there's very realistic trades that you can start to think about and start to craft. Oh, yeah. For example, if you want picks, you can go ahead with that. You're certainly likely to get a decent haul for him right now from a contender. If your trade deadlines obviously haven't passed, and if you don't want the picks, rerolling him for like a younger receiver or like a younger running back with potential and maybe a pick, like I could see. I have to think a little bit, but I could see like re-rolling him for like a Trevion or like even like a Genty type where like likely if we project like 3-4 years down the line, I'd say both of them are going to probably have more cumulative points than JT, but certainly the rest of this season and maybe even next, I'd be hard pressed to agree with that. So I think there's a lot of practical moves that can be taken depending on your team state. But like I said, I think his value is fragile and trading him is difficult. He's kind of one of those guys, these older running backs like Saquon, who I think I might spoil this a little. We're going to talk about him shortly. Sometimes it's difficult to trade these older running backs for the latter end of their career because you do have to convince someone to give up a haul for short-term returns.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to move on, but I just want to acknowledge the potential very unlikely possibility that this is a Derrick Henry situation where he's just a superhuman and continues to produce into his 30s. Like there's a non-zero chance of that. That's all.
Yeah, I mean he's a durable running back for sure.
But again, unlikely. All right. In terms of risers, I really only have one more that I want to talk about. And again, we probably don't have to spend a ton of time. But Javonte Williams, I just think is a really interesting case where he came into the league as a very, very highly touted prospect. After a significant knee injury, he dramatically fell off from a film perspective, certainly from a statistical and analytical perspective. And it seemed like, the league and the dynasty community, the fantasy community as a whole kind of pushed him to the side, gave up on him. And I'm not even going to say that that's unwarranted, but he was down, kind of around like the RB 50 range as recently as this August, coming into a season where he was likely going to be the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. There's a lot that can be discussed about that situation, right? Like some people didn't believe as much in the Cowboys offense as maybe we did. We were touting them all off season as an offense to target. I'm not going to pretend like I was touting Javonte Williams. I was also not interested in Javonte very much, but I probably should have been, just based on the fact that we thought that this was going to be a high octane, high scoring offense. The issue, I think, was probably that we thought he was the starter by default, not because he would earn it or not because he was necessarily a good running back. And he's surprised us with this dramatic improvement in his level of ability, or maybe it's just a health-related thing where he's finally recovered from that injury. But I'm curious your thoughts on his rise and if there is anything to really be taken away, or if this is just kind of a one-off type scenario.
Sure. Yeah, I think I agree with what you said. I think broadly, this again kind of continues to highlight one of the themes we've discussed in this video a good bit about the volatility of different positions and the situation dependence. And again, running back is certainly one of the ones where, I mean, week to week, season to season, it can be volatile depending on just how the team views the player and the situation, if there's going to be a committee or a decent running back split, if they're going to get a significant rush share or not. And I agree that we knew Javonte was talented. And so that, and if you drafted him, you likely knew that as well. And you've held him for a while, for a couple of years now. And if we did, you're definitely gonna be happy with his production now. But I think this is a scenario where a team decided to say, hey, like we like this guy. I think they picked him up from the Broncos he was at last or most recently, and gave him the keys to the running game, and he shined. And it's situations like these can be hard to predict, but yeah, I mean the running back position can be really volatile. And I think you're happy with his position. I don't quite know how old he is. Is he like around 26? Is that what that's saying?
25.6. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe he's not quite as old as a few others I'd noted down. I was going to touch on, I think there's kind of several other kind of aging vets. I don't know if we can call Javonte quite a vet yet, but you can put them in this like weird bucket where they had talent, they showed it, and they might have dropped off and plateaued, but they're in this plateau of like late career production, or maybe they don't have the most dynasty value. I mean, if Javonte was a couple years younger, I think he would be more than the RB18 for sure. But you can kind of put this in this bucket with like late career production possible, like David Montgomery or Aaron Jones is, I think, still continuing to produce and has some pass catching ability. Kareem Hunt's just dropping kind of some spike games left and right. Yeah. He just kind of popped into the head. I think practically, I'm not sure the volatility here or like how tradable he is, or if many people are. I just glanced at your screen. I see Keep Trade Cut's liquidity metric, which I assume is related to like how often he's being traded, and he's a 0. So, Javonte Williams isn't the most exciting name, but if you've had him or you were able to kind of pick him up, likely for cheap in the offseason, I mean, he's definitely paying you dividends now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think strictly from a contending perspective, he was a phenomenal buy if you were able to get him this offseason. And like you mentioned, the liquidity is incredibly low. I'm even skeptical of this kind of future pick value. I don't know that anybody's giving you a first for Javonte, whether it's late or not. I think that's probably over-exaggerating it. And so, yeah, I think you made a great point. As these guys kind of get later on into their careers, their dynasty values start to drop or plateau. But they can continue to be productive for contending teams, and they become a value again after that drop off. Right. And so I think that's kind of the range that Javonte has found himself in, and hopefully can continue to be in for at least a couple more years.
Sure. And if you have him, hey, go get some feelers out for some firsts, apparently.
Yeah, I would take that in a heartbeat. But all right, so that'll do it, at least for me, for risers. Is there anybody else you want to talk about before we transition to fallers?
No, not really. I think there's a couple of obvious ones I think that we can touch on. I don't want to have a long discussion about them, but I think Trevion's value looks like it's blowing up. Quinshon Judkins should be around here. So I'm actually surprised to see him at a fall, though I think maybe his redraft, or at least over the season, we've seen him kind of gain more respect and his production increase. And I think really kind of an underlying story there, and this shouldn't be too surprising, is that you make a bet on these talented rookie running backs and receivers as well. We talked about pass catchers last video, and it takes time for them to blossom, and you kind of have to be patient with them. This is more of a redraft take, but even in Dynasty too, if I'm hoping that no one drafted Travion Henderson with whatever he was worth, and then or whatever rookie pick he was going for, and then just dropped him a couple months ago because like Patriots aren't using him much, like they're using Ramondre. He's talented. He's going to show up, and we did just talk about how like with the running back position situation does matters a lot, and maybe it wasn't in his favor. Although we saw Ramondre just fumbling left and right, like he was due for a rise, and I think we're seeing it now. And I think there's not really major lessons to begin other than look with rookies, they can rise after some time and kind of just leave it at that.
Have some patience. Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's switch over to the faller category. And as you alluded to a little bit earlier, we should talk about Saquon Barkley down here at the RB14. Something that I was surprised to learn when looking into it for this video. He was the RB4 as early as this September at 28 years old. I get that he just came off the RB1 season, right? And so it makes sense, especially from a contender perspective, just how we talked about with JT, that he should be valued quite highly. But over the offseason, like prior to getting into the time where contention and winning games actually matters, I just felt like that was way too high. I love Saquon. I think he's incredibly talented. I don't think he's necessarily falling off physically right now. It's just a situation-based, situation-dependent fall that we've talked about with these running backs, where the offensive coordinator has been not so great. The offensive line play and overall health has been much lower than we saw from last season. The overall offensive environment and ability to score points at a high volume has gone down. And so that's drastically impacted his ability to produce as a running back. And so now, you're left with a closing in on 29-year-old running back who's dropped all the way down to RB14. He does have high liquidity. People are able to trade him. And if you can get a mid first, I think I'd probably be quite happy with that. But just in terms of lessons, like I wasn't as scared off by the volume argument. There were a lot of people saying that just based on the sheer number of touches that he got last year, that the likelihood of a drop off this year was high. And I'm not even saying that that's wrong. That could be playing into it. That certainly could be a factor. But just because of what we know about situational impacts on the running back position, you can't be that certain with somebody like this, and you can't afford to be patient with somebody of his age. So that was what kind of concerned me with him.
Yeah, and I think, the Madden and Offensive Player of the Year curses, they're powerful, man.
Sure.
And I think kind of continuing off what you say, you touched on JT. We did just talk about JT. We talked about how he is worth a lot and how he's incredibly talented. But yeah, looking back at my notes when we were talking about a list of players to touch on this video, I wrote JT down as a possible comp here for kind of what he's going through now and what we might see. I personally have given my shares of JT. I'll be upset, but I can't say that, if in the next 2 years we see JT also drop to like the double-digit RB range or further down, especially in the Dynasty world, if we start to see other talented running backs, like Jeremiah Love and stuff, they're going to be in the top 10. So someone has to fall. Yeah. I don't know if we would be too surprised. And this is just kind of the natural rise and fall of players. And I think Saquon and JT are likely players that, just given their pedigree and history, they're probably going to hit that plateau and just be relevant for a while. They're just extremely talented running backs. But absolutely. I think that a big takeaway here is like Saquon's value, 99.5% of the time, like he's not going to ever go back to top 5 running back value. And that's not a slight at him or his talent. It's a slight at his age and just how cruel the Dynasty community can be. That's kind of a matter of fact. Given the pass catching ability and emergence of these running backs like Bijan and Gibbs and Jeremiah Love looks to be good, and Genti's going to start popping off more. Like Saquon's not really going to go back. And so if you're a contender, obviously you're sitting. If you're not, no better time to get rid of him, because if you have, you should have already, but no better time to get rid of him because, value wise, if you're again maximizing the value of your team, like it's not really going to go back up ever. He might sit for a while, but he's not breaking top 5 running back again, likely just due to age and how the dynasty community views people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then I have one more guy that I wanted to bring up specifically in terms of fallers. I put him on my list a couple weeks ago, and he has actually rebounded a little bit, but I still think it's an interesting conversation to have, and that's going to be Chase Brown. We'll pull him up here. As recently as the start of this season, he was all the way up inside the top 10 running backs. He had a great season last year, but again, very situation dependent. That Cincinnati offense was scoring at a historic level. His volume was pretty unprecedented, not just as a running back in this day and age where the rise of running back by committees is so high, but also just based on his profile and kind of his size, we could kind of project that maybe that volume wasn't going to be sustainable. Whether or not that ended up being true this season, just based on situational factors, we saw this offense fall off, and we saw his value as a dynasty asset drop off tremendously, all the way from RB9 down to RB23. These past couple weeks have been a little bit better, and with Joe Burrow potentially on the way back, his value has increased slightly. But just, I think the lesson that I took from this is when we're talking about these lesser pedigree, later round drafted running backs, it's really hard to put all your eggs in that basket. Like their volatility and their likelihood of maintaining their job security is just inherently way lower than the likes of some of the top names that have just come into the league, like a Genty or a Travion or a Quinshawn, and as they develop into their careers, right, where a guy like Chase Brown just doesn't have that stability.
Yeah, I think that was very well put. I think the biggest point you made, I think, was towards the end when we're looking at this as a kind of a case study and say, well, what can we learn? I mean, we're all trying to win our leagues. I think your latter point about this is a elite prospect. I think Chase Brown's extremely talented, and none of these are slights at players. Obviously, yeah. The entire discussion we're having is how the community views players. But he wasn't viewed as some ridiculous top 2 level asset that's pass catching and running and like Genty type running back out of college. When we look at them, and then we think about, well, how could their value change? If you scroll down a little bit and we look at his running back ranking, what I can tell you is that from September, where he was a single digit top 10 running back, to October or whatever, where he was down to like the 23, his talent did not significantly change. His age did not significantly change. These are matters of fact.
Yep.
This is, and then now it's going back up again. Like in the last couple of weeks, his talent age haven't really changed. And it just, again, this once again kind of goes to show and maybe the lesson that can be learned is like if you have a running back that's not an elite talent prospect, then they are going to be a function, an artifact of their team and their situation. And I think the pattern we saw with Chase Brown this year, and actually his ride leading up to this as well in the last year, is just all basically mirroring the Cincinnati offense and how people view them and how people view the upside of the Cincinnati offense. Matter of fact. And I think also, unfortunately, the defense not being phenomenal is not particularly helping him as a running back in terms of game script. But, that gets a little more nuanced into maybe redraft topics that we don't have to discuss, because ultimately we're interested in his long-term value as a running back. And yeah, it seems volatile. I'm surprised to see his liquidity index being high there. I'm sure that's just a kind of number of trades happening. I'm really curious to see what kind they are. I didn't look into them too much, but I think maybe that's something we can discuss in the comments.
Yeah. And I think it's also worth noting that he was an older prospect, came out a little bit later. He's already approaching 26 years old, only in this is his second season, right?
Yeah, second or third. I mean, I think
experience 2 years.
We're older than these guys now, man. I don't know if we can call them, but I know you weren't. I was thinking that. I was like, 26 for a running back. Bro, I'm 2 years old and I haven't done anything. But yeah, so I mean, you're right though. I think that's another point to add on top of that. Not only was he not a particularly level talent coming out of college, he was also a slightly older prospect. And older prospects will typically also have volatility earlier in their career because there's always going to be a little bit of worry that if they don't produce right away and at a high level, like, will they ever? And that leads to sharp downfalls.
Absolutely. All right. So that will probably do it for specific names that we want to bring up to discuss in depth. But to round things out, again, if you don't have an answer, that's fine. We're both trying to figure this out as we go. But is there anybody on this list of running backs that you think we can apply some of those lessons we just talked about to?
Not many. I think Bucky is kind of an interesting discussion to have. He's not old. He's a very young running back. He wasn't
23.
some elite level talent, but he was certainly, he had a good profile. And he showed nice flashes last year when he was an excellent running back. Can you click on, I'm curious to see his chart and how volatile it is, because I would expect it to have, it's not volatile at all.
It's actually relatively stable. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I'm surprised. I'm a little bit surprised because I think a lot of lessons we're discussing, basically what I would expect here is a continued drop off for a while and then a plateau. He's talented and perhaps it's his age that's kind of cementing and pulling it back a little bit. If Bucky was a couple years older, had a good season, but then in the following season didn't show as high of a level and upside, and then also got injured, I would expect a steeper drop off.
Yeah, I completely agree. I loved Bucky as a prospect. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of kind of wavering after what was a really poor combine performance. And a lot of the community started to lessen what they thought of him. But I really liked his film and his productivity at Oregon. He was a later round pick in round 4. He is on the smaller side, obviously, sub 200 pounds. And so the combination of those two things absolutely make him at risk for that lower level of job security. I think he really did prove himself in that first season and kind of cemented himself into that role. But there's no such thing as a guarantee at the running back position. And we've seen not only have injuries impacted his dynasty value, but also just how this Buccaneers offense has trended this season, not quite to the level that it was last year.
I do think, go ahead.
No, you got it.
Yeah, I just want a quick shout out. I think he's extremely talented. I think when the Bucs offense lost him this year, we saw a sharp decline in their productivity. I think that he is integral to that offense, and I think we're actually seeing that. Despite look, Sean Tucker had a great game a couple weeks ago, but I think Bucky is I think he's important to the team. I think he's an extremely talented 3-down running back, and I think they're definitely missing him.
Absolutely, but I think that's a good shout out. I think Kyron could be in a similar boat where he's starting to get a little bit older, and we're seeing Blake Corum eat into his touches some. Offensive situation could change going into future years if Matt Stafford decides not to come back or decides to retire. So I think he falls into a similar bucket. But in terms of these top tier guys, it's made up of a lot of rookies, and so a lot of those guys have more stability in their dynasty value.
Right.
But yeah, I think that will do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, if you guys didn't watch part 1, check it out. That's going to be the last video that we posted on the channel where we talked about wide receivers and tight ends. Vishy, thank you for joining me on here. I know you don't get to get on the channel quite as much, but I always love it when you get on here with me and we can have these deep and interesting conversations.
Yeah, man, it's a blast. I think I consume a lot of content, and it's fun coming on here and yapping as if I'm an expert when that's certainly not the case. But I think just I do this to kind of follow along and make myself a better fantasy player as well. And I think if you're listening, a lot of what we say are kind of just rooted in facts and in potential lessons to take away. And I think it's a lot of fun. I'm going to try to get a fun setup where I can hang some Ravens and Orioles stuff back up. I think got to look forward to next season with the Orioles, man. They got a sour taste in my mouth right now. I saw I forget it was some Instagram post. I forget what it was. It was something like it can't have been like the Ravens have won a game more recently than the Orioles. It must be something else. It was like someone has won a game more recently than the Orioles, or the Orioles have won a game more recently than some team, and it was just really easy. But yeah, cool.
Got to be rooting for those home teams, man. But yeah, appreciate you coming on. To our audience, always appreciate you guys tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, if you learned something from it, please do leave a like, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all of our latest videos, as well as the notification bell for that same reason. And if you want to be part of our community, if you want to contribute to the discussion, hit the comments down below with any of your opinions, and also check out the link for our Discord in the description. But with that, I think we can head out of here, and we'll catch you in the next video. Peace.